Chapter 1. A Morning at Biggin Hill. The morning of October 12th, 1935, broke over Biggin Hill Aerodrome with a clarity that seemed to promise great things. The Kentish airfield, usually a tranquil haven of mechanical ingenuity, thrummed with an unaccustomed vigour. Mechanics, their overalls streaked with oil, moved with purpose among the engines, coaxing life from metal with the turn of a wrench. Reporters, armed with pencils and notepads, darted about, capturing the boasts of pilots who lounged with the easy confidence of men accustomed to defying gravity. The air carried the pungent bite of aviation fuel, undercut by the drone of propellers and the faint, earthy scent of the surrounding fields. At the center of this orchestrated chaos stood the Skylark, a silver monoplane of such sleek design that it appeared to gleam with ambition. Its wings, broad and perfectly contoured, awaited the moment they would cleave the sky. Today's flight, a ceremonial prelude to Captain Victor Hargreaves's transatlantic record attempt, had drawn a crowd eager to witness history in its infancy. From a taxi that rolled to a halt on the gravel path emerged Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes announcing his arrival with a crisp crunch. His suit, immaculate in its cut, and his Homburg hat, tilted with precision, set him apart from the rugged figures around him. His moustache, a marvel of wax and symmetry, bristled as he surveyed the scene. The open-mouthed hangars, the workshop cluttered with tools, the smoky haze of the pilot's lounge, and the café buzzing with anticipation. An old friend from the Royal Air Force had invited him to observe this spectacle, and Poirot, ever curious, had accepted. Among the crowd, Captain Lionel Drake cut a striking figure, his broad shoulders squared as he addressed a reporter. "Hargreaves might break the record," he said, his voice ringing with bravado, "but I'd do it better." His grin was wide, yet Poirot noted the flicker of envy in his eyes, a shadow beneath the bluster. In the workshop, Miss Clara Weston bent over a blueprint, her grey jumpsuit a muted contrast to her sharp focus. "The fuel line's perfect now," she murmured to a mechanic, her words clipped and certain. Her hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, and Poirot observed the intensity that seemed to isolate her from the clamour. Near the hangar, Mr. Edward Sinclair stood aloof, his pinstripe suit pristine as he muttered to a sponsor, "This flight's my lifeline." His cigarette smoke curled upward, but his cold eyes betrayed no warmth, only calculation. Sergeant Jack Brennan, a mechanic of rough demeanour, wrestled with a fuel pump beside the Skylark. "Hand me the wrench!" he barked, his oil-stained hands deft despite his gruffness. Poirot noted the military set of his jaw, a relic of discipline amid the chaos. Mrs. Evelyn Marwood, elegant in a fur-trimmed coat, glided into the café, her auburn hair a splash of colour. "Victor's always been daring," she told a reporter, her smile thin and her gaze distant, as if peering into a past she wished to forget. Poirot caught a mechanic's grumble. "Hargreaves has been on edge lately. I heard him yelling at someone last night." The man's brow furrowed, as if weighing whether to say more. At 10 o'clock, Captain Victor Hargreaves emerged, his flight suit a testament to his confidence. "Today's a taste of what's to come," he proclaimed to the crowd, his voice steady. He nodded to Weston, shook Sinclair's hand firmly, and passed Drake without a glance, ignoring the rival's smirk. The Skylark roared to life, its engine a thunderous pulse as it taxied down the runway. The crowd cheered as it lifted off, tracing a graceful arc against the sky. Poirot watched, his green eyes narrowed in appreciation. Then, as the plane banked, the engine faltered, a sputter, then silence. Gasps rose. The monoplane wobbled, its wings tilting, before plunging into a field with a shattering crunch. Smoke coiled upward, dark and foreboding. Screams pierced the air. Poirot's gaze swept the crowd. Drake's eyes widened in shock. Weston's hand flew to her mouth. Sinclair's jaw tightened. Brennan cursed softly, and Marwood swooned with theatrical grace. Poirot whispered, "This is no accident." Chapter 2. The Fallen Skylark. The aftermath of the crash was a tableau of ruin, a grim spectacle that silenced the vibrant hum of Biggin Hill Aerodrome. The Skylark, once a proud emblem of human daring, lay shattered across the field, its silver frame twisted into grotesque shapes. Smoke rose in thick, choking plumes, curling into the crisp October air, while the sharp tang of aviation fuel assaulted the senses, blending with the bitter scent of scorched grass. The crowd, so recently alight with jubilation, stood transfixed, their faces drained of color, their breaths caught in a collective gasp of disbelief. Hercule Poirot, his small frame taut with purpose, hastened toward the wreckage, his polished shoes slipping on the dew-slick earth. Beside him strode Inspector Grayson, a man of imposing height and graver demeanor, his voice ringing out with authority as he directed his constables. "Secure the perimeter," he barked. "No one approaches until we've assessed the scene." Assigned to ensure the safety of this illustrious event, Grayson now faced a task far grimmer than he had anticipated. Poirot's keen gaze swept over the devastation. The plane had plunged nose first into the soil, its fuselage crumpled like a discarded sheet of foil, its wings rent asunder. Within the wreckage, the broken form of Captain Victor Hargreaves remained, pinned in the cockpit, a silent testament to the violence of the descent. Dr. Harold Tate, the aerodrome's medical officer, arrived with a brisk step, his face etched with solemnity. Kneeling beside the wreckage, he examined the pilot with practiced hands, then rose, his expression unchanging. "Dead," he pronounced quietly. "The impact was catastrophic. There's no mistaking it." Poirot inclined his head, his cat-like eyes narrowing. Death was no stranger to him, yet the abrupt snuffing out of such a vital spirit stirred a quiet unease within his orderly mind. As Poirot and Grayson surveyed the scene, a cluster of figures, each intimately tied to Hargreaves or the flight, began to gather near the cordon. Their presence was not mere chance. They were drawn by their roles, their investments, or their personal stakes in the tragedy unfolding before them. Captain Lionel Drake pushed his way through the crowd, his usual swagger replaced by a stunned rigidity. "He was a good pilot," he muttered, his voice fraying at the edges as he stared at the wreckage. "This shouldn't have happened." His words, though spoken aloud, seemed directed at the chaos itself, a plea for sense in the senseless. Miss Clara Weston hovered at the periphery, her engineer's eye scanning the twisted metal with a mixture of horror and disbelief. When Poirot's gaze fell upon her, she started as if jolted from a trance. "It was perfect," she insisted, her voice trembling as she met his eyes. "I checked everything myself." Mr. Edward Sinclair stood apart, his face a mask of controlled emotion. "A disaster," he murmured, more to himself than to the others, yet loud enough for Poirot to catch. His fingers tapped a restless rhythm against his thigh, betraying a mind already calculating losses. Sergeant Jack Brennan crouched near a fragment of the wing, his rough hands tracing its jagged edge with an odd fascination. "Bloody waste," he growled, his tone harsh, though his touch on the debris was almost tender, as if mourning the machine's fate. Mrs. Evelyn Marwood, ever the picture of elegance, had positioned herself where she could be seen by the gathering onlookers. As Poirot watched, she swayed slightly, then collapsed into a graceful faint, her fur coat splaying about her like a fallen curtain. A solicitous bystander quickly revived her, and she fluttered her eyes open with poised elegance, her performance as striking as it was deliberate. Poirot filed away these observations, each reaction a brushstroke in the vivid mosaic of human nature under strain. Their convergence near the wreckage was a natural response. Drake's professional concern, Weston's duty to her craft, Sinclair's financial stake, Brennan's practical involvement, and Marwood's ties to Hargreaves all drew them here, as moths to a flame. Stepping closer to the wreckage, Poirot's sharp eyes caught a gleam amid the chaos. A wire, frayed not by chance, but by intent. His mind, ever precise, turned over the facts, the engine's failure at the critical turn, the sheer improbability of such a collapse. "Inspector," he said softly, his tone measured. This was no mere accident. The Skylark was sabotaged. Grayson's brow furrowed, skepticism warring with respect. "Sabotage, Monsieur Poirot, that's a bold claim." Poirot gestured to the wire. "Observe, mon ami. This severance is too clean, too deliberate. A failure so perfectly timed suggests a hand guided by malice." The inspector studied the evidence, his doubt giving way to a grim nod. "If you're right, we're dealing with murder." The aerodrome's festive spirit had withered into a pall of suspicion. Reporters, their pencils now frantic, pressed against the cordon, shouting questions that hung unanswered in the air. Officers stood sentinel, their faces stern as they rebuffed the curious. In the distance, the faint hum of another engine drifted on the wind, a poignant echo of ambition undone. Poirot's gaze returned to the group near the wreckage, each a cipher in this nascent enigma. Motives flickered in his mind: envy, scorn, avarice. Yet the truth remained elusive, buried in the wreckage and the secrets of those who had witnessed the Skylark's fall. Chapter 3. Whispers of Sabotage. The wreckage of the Skylark sprawled across the field like the broken carcass of some great bird, its silver sheen dulled by soot and ruin. A faint haze of smoke still curled upward, tainting the crisp October air with the bitter tang of scorched metal and fuel. Hercule Poirot, his diminutive figure immaculate amidst the chaos, picked his way through the debris with the precision of a man who loathed disorder. His polished shoes hesitated over each patch of churned earth, and his green eyes, sharp as a cat's, surveyed the scene with meticulous care. Poirot was no engineer. Such mechanical intricacies were beneath his purview. Yet his mind, attuned to the subtleties of the anomalous, required no such expertise. He paused beside a mangled section of the fuselage, his gloved hand hovering as he beckoned a mechanic forward. "You, mon ami," he said softly, his voice carrying the faintest trace of a Belgian lilt. "This wire here, it is not as it should be, n'est-ce pas?" The mechanic, a wiry man with grease-stained hands, knelt beside him, peering at the severed fuel line. "Blimey," he muttered, his tone sharp with surprise. "That's been cut, not broken. Clean as a whistle." Poirot's moustache gave a slight twitch of satisfaction. "Précisément," he murmured, his gaze shifting to a cluster of control cables, their ends frayed in a manner too deliberate to be accidental. The mechanic traced the damage, his expression darkening. "Someone's tampered with these," he said gruffly. "This weren't no crash by chance." Poirot inclined his head, then stooped to retrieve a glinting object half buried in the soil, a wrench, its size and make foreign to the aerodrome's standard tools. "And this," he mused, turning it over in his hands, "it is not one of yours, I think?" The mechanic shrugged uneasily. "Ain't from our kit. Could belong to anyone, I reckon." Poirot slipped the wrench into his pocket, his mind already threading these discoveries into a tapestry of intent. Sabotage was no longer a suspicion, but a certainty. As he straightened, a second mechanic approached, a burly man with a weathered face. "You're the detective, ain't you?" he said, eyeing Poirot with wary curiosity. "If you're sniffing about, you might ask after Miss Weston. She was here late last night poking around the hangar." Poirot's interest quickened. "Miss Weston, the engineer?" "Aye," the man replied, lowering his voice. "Always so quiet she is. but she stayed long after we'd packed up." "Merci," Poirot said, dismissing the man with a nod. His gaze drifted to Miss Lucy Carter, Hargreaves's assistant, who lingered near the cordon, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly about a clipboard. Her fingers gripped the edges with a faint tremble, a silent testament to the shock she bore. He approached her with the measured tread of one skilled in drawing forth hidden truths. "Mademoiselle Carter," he began, his tone gentle and unhurried, "you worked closely with Captain Hargreaves in his preparations, did you not? Tell me, how did he seem to you in the days before the flight?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the wreckage before meeting his. "He was tense, Monsieur Poirot, not his usual self. He seemed distracted, always checking things twice, as if he didn't trust they'd stay as he left them." Poirot tilted his head, his voice softening further. "Distracted, you say? Did he ever speak of what troubled him? Perhaps a worry that weighed upon his mind?" Miss Carter's lips parted, then closed, as if weighing her words. He didn't say much, not directly, but he was on edge. Once or twice he mentioned receiving letters. Odd ones, he called them. He brushed it off, but I could tell it bothered him. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet interest. "Letters, huh? And these tensions at the aerodrome, did they perhaps add to his burden?" Miss Carter nodded, her voice steadier now. "It was his dream, to cross the Atlantic to be the best. Mr. Sinclair had sunk a fortune into it, and there were arguments about the money. Captain Drake, too. He couldn't bear Victor outshining him." "And did he ever hint," Poirot pressed gently, "that someone might wish to stop this dream from taking flight?" She swallowed, her gaze flickering away. "He said once, half joking, that he'd make it across unless someone brought him down first. I thought he meant the weather, or his nerves. But now—" Her voice trailed off, leaving the implication to hang in the air. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign of his satisfaction. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have given me much to consider." He left her to her thoughts and sought out Inspector Grayson, who stood directing the constables with a furrowed brow. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and deliberate, "the evidence speaks plainly. A severed fuel line, frayed cables, a wrench that does not belong, all point to sabotage." Grayson's jaw tightened. "You're certain, then? This is murder?" Poirot produced the wrench from his pocket, holding it aloft. "Oui, Inspector. And consider this. Such discreet work requires not only opportunity but skill. Only an expert could have wrought this so cleverly." Grayson's skepticism softened into resolve. "One of the engineers, perhaps." Poirot smiled faintly, his fingers brushing his moustache. "Perhaps. The truth lies in the details, and my little grey cells, they are only beginning to unravel them." The aerodrome, once alive with festivity, now bore the weight of suspicion, its air thick with whispers of treachery. Poirot stood amidst the wreckage, a solitary figure of order in a world turned askew, his mind already tracing the threads of a mystery that promised to be as intricate as it was sinister. Chapter 4. Faces in the Crowd. The pilot's lounge at Biggin Hill Aerodrome exuded a quiet melancholy, its air thick with the scent of tobacco and aged leather. Faded photographs of soaring planes lined the walls, their frames tilted slightly, as though bowing in silent tribute. Hercule Poirot entered, his polished shoes tapping a measured rhythm against the worn floorboards, a meticulous counterpoint to the room's rugged disarray. Captain Lionel Drake stood before a portrait of Hargreaves, his broad shoulders slumped, a leather logbook dangling from his hand. His face, typically alight with swagger, was shadowed with a pallor that spoke of sleepless hours and stunned grief. "Monsieur Drake," Poirot began, his voice soft yet precise, tinged with his characteristic Belgian inflection. "You were a comrade of Captain Hargreaves, oui?" Drake turned slowly, his eyes hollow as they met Poirot's. "I was," he said, his voice rough, catching on the edges. "We flew together for years. To see him gone like this—" He paused, swallowing hard, his gaze drifting to the window where the wreckage smouldered in the distance. "It's a blow, Monsieur Poirot. A terrible blow." Poirot inclined his head, his green eyes sharp yet sympathetic. "A tragedy most unexpected. He was a man of great skill, n'est-ce pas?" Drake nodded, his fingers tightening on the logbook until the leather creaked. "The best of us," he murmured. "He had a way with the sky, fearless, almost too much so. But now—" His voice faltered, and he shook his head. "It's too soon to speak ill of him. He's barely cold." "Précisément," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. "And yet, the cause of such a fall, it intrigues one, does it not?" Drake's jaw tightened, a flicker of restraint crossing his features. "Something went wrong," he said carefully. "That much is clear. But what? I can't fathom it. Not yet." He looked away, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He deserved better than this." The workshop sprawled like a mechanical jungle, its benches strewn with tools and blueprints, the air heavy with the tang of oil and scorched metal. Miss Clara Weston stood at its heart, her grey jumpsuit streaked with grease, her hands deftly arranging a row of wrenches. Her face was drawn, her eyes rimmed with the faint redness of unshed tears, yet she held herself with a stubborn dignity. Poirot approached, his pristine suit an anomaly amid the chaos, his moustache gleaming faintly in the dim light. "Mademoiselle Weston," he said, his voice a soothing balm against the clangor. "Your creation, the skylark, it was a thing of beauty, oui?" Weston's gaze met his, fierce and unwavering despite the shadows beneath her eyes. "It was perfect," she declared, her tone resolute. "Every bolt, every wire, I checked them myself. There was no flaw in her." Poirot tilted his head, observing the faint tremble in her fingers as she gripped a wrench. "And Captain Hargreaves, he placed his faith in your work." Her expression softened, a crack in her armor. "He did," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with memory. "He'd come down here, watch me tinker and say, 'Clara, you're the only one I'd trust with my wings.' He meant it too." "C'est curieux," Poirot mused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "A plane so perfect, a pilot so trusting, and yet the sky betrayed them both." Weston flinched, her hand pausing over a blueprint. "It wasn't the skylark," she insisted, her voice rising. "Something else, someone else, must have interfered. I'd stake my life on it." Poirot's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. "A bold claim, mademoiselle. And what of your bond with Hargreaves? Was it merely professional?" Her cheeks flushed, and she turned away, busying herself with a tool. "He was a friend," she said stiffly. "A good one. That's all you need to know." "Peut-être," Poirot replied, his tone light but his gaze piercing. "But the smallest threads, mademoiselle, often weave the grandest tapestry." Mr. Edward Sinclair's office was a bastion of order, its shelves groaning under the weight of ledgers, a telegram pinned beneath a glass paperweight. Funds critical. Sinclair himself sat behind his desk, his suit immaculate, his face a study in controlled composure. Yet, as Poirot entered, the faintest twitch of his fingers betrayed a deeper unrest. "Monsieur Sinclair," Poirot greeted, his voice smooth. "The loss of Captain Hargreaves. It affects you greatly, I presume." Sinclair's eyes met Poirot's, cool and calculating. "A tragedy, of course," he said, His tone clipped. Hargreaves was more than a pilot. He was a cornerstone of my enterprise. His success was to be mine. Poirot's fingers brushed the telegram, a deliberate gesture. And now, without that success, your ventures, they falter. Sinclair's smile was tight, a thin veneer over strain. Business is a game of adaptation, he replied. The flight was to secure a contract. Millions, Monsieur Poirot. Without it, I face challenges. Challenges, Poirot echoed, his tone deceptively mild. A polite word for desperation, non? Sinclair's fingers stilled, his gaze sharpening. I've weathered worse, he said curtly. But Hargreaves's death, it complicates matters. The investors grow nervous. Poirot nodded, his moustache twitching. And nervous investors, monsieur, they do not part easily with their gold. Sinclair leaned back, his composure fraying at the edges. Precisely, he murmured, but I'll find a way. I always do. The wreckage lay scattered across the field, a skeletal ruin beneath a leaden sky. Sergeant Jack Brennan crouched beside a twisted spar, his calloused hands tracing the jagged edges. His eyes flicked briefly to a tarp-covered crate nearby, then back as Poirot approached, his boots crunching on the frost-bitten grass. Brennan's face was a mask of gruff stoicism, but a wary glint lingered in his gaze. Sergeant Brennan, Poirot said, his tone bright despite the grim scene, you were the guardian of the Skylark, oui? Brennan stood, brushing dirt from his hands with a grunt. I kept her running, he said, his voice low and gravelly. Oiled her, patched her, did what was needed. Poirot's eyes followed the glance to the crate. A task well done, one assumes, and yet she lies in pieces. Brennan's shoulders tensed, his jaw setting. Things break, he muttered. Planes, people. Nothing lasts forever. Fremont, Poirot agreed, stepping closer. But this crate, perhaps it holds a clue to her demise. Brennan's hand twitched, his tone sharpening. Just parts, he snapped. Spare gear, nothing more. You're barking up the wrong tree, monsieur. Poirot's smile was serene, unperturbed. The wrong tree, Sergeant? Or merely one you wish me not to climb? Brennan glowered, crossing his arms. I've got nothing to hide, he growled. Ask your questions, but don't expect me to play your game. Pas de jeu, Poirot replied softly. Only the truth, Sergeant. The café was a pocket of warmth amid the aerodrome's chill, its windows fogged with steam. Mrs. Evelyn Marwood sat at a corner table, her fur coat draped with effortless elegance, a teacup cradled in her manicured hands. Her face was a mask of poised sorrow, but her eyes gleamed with a shrewd intensity as Poirot approached, bowing slightly. Madame Marwood, he said, his voice a velvet thread. Captain Hargreaves, he was your husband, n'est-ce pas? Her lips curved into a faint practiced smile. Victor, she said, her tone smooth as silk. A man of boundless ambition. He lived for the sky, perhaps too much. Poirot settled opposite her, his gaze steady. And now that life is ended, a loss most profound. Marwood's fingers tightened briefly on the cup, a tremor betraying her calm. Profound, yes, she replied. We were not always in harmony, he and I. He chased his dreams, and I built a life beside them. C'est intéressant, Poirot mused. And his dreams, they leave behind a legacy, oui? Her eyes flickered, a shadow crossing her composure. His estate, you mean, she said coolly. It's substantial. Victor was never one for moderation, in wealth or otherwise. Poirot's moustache twitched. A fortune, then, to ease your grief? Marwood set the cup down with a delicate clink, her smile sharpening. Grief is a private matter, Monsieur Poirot. As for fortune, It's merely what I'm owed after years of his absences." "Naturellement," Poirot said, his tone light but his mind alight. A debt repaid, perhaps, in the coin of opportunity. Poirot stepped into the cold, his breath misting in the air, his little grey cells humming with the day's revelations. Drake's restrained sorrow masked a lingering envy. Weston's pride shielded a fragile loyalty. Sinclair's calm concealed a desperate hunger. Brennan's gruffness cloaked a secretive edge, and Marwood's elegance hid a calculating greed. Each face in the crowd bore its own shadow, and Poirot knew the truth lay nestled within their tangled motives, waiting to be unravelled. Chapter 5. Threads of Evidence. The workshop at Biggin Hill Aerodrome was a cavern of shadows and steel, its air thick with the scent of oil and burnt metal. Hercule Poirot stood beneath a flickering lamp, its light casting a pale glow over the workbench where he examined the wrench, a tool that did not belong. His gloved fingers turned it slowly, noting its unfamiliar heft, the maker's mark etched into its handle. Harrison and Sons, Limited, a brand foreign to the aerodrome's standard kit. He set it down with a faint clink, his green eyes narrowing as he considered its significance. Miss Clara Weston lingered near the doorway, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze darting between Poirot and the wrench. "That's not one of ours," she said, her voice taut. "I've never seen it before." "Précisément," Poirot murmured, his tone mild, but his mind alight. "And yet, it was found among the wreckage, n'est-ce pas? A curious thing, to be sure." He stepped toward the tangle of control cables salvaged from the Skylark, his fingers brushing a frayed end where a scrap of grey fabric clung, snagged in the wires. Poirot plucked it free, holding it to the light. A perfect match to Weston's jumpsuit. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Mademoiselle Weston," he said softly, "this fabric, it is yours, I think." Weston's face paled, her hands trembling faintly. I must have brushed against the plane earlier," she stammered. "I was checking the cables, as I always do." "Bien sûr," Poirot replied, his voice a velvet thread. A natural explanation, and yet the mind, it wonders. He pocketed the scrap, his gaze lingering on her a moment longer before he turned away, leaving her to the silence of the workshop. The pilot's locker room was a narrow, shadowed space, its walls lined with metal compartments, each bearing the name of its owner in weathered stencil. A chill hung in the air, the faint hum of distant machinery echoing through the concrete floor. Poirot stood before Hargreaves' locker, its door ajar, a subtle scent of leather and aftershave wafting forth, a lingering trace of a life abruptly ended. With the precision of a surgeon, he sifted through the contents, flight logs bound in cracked leather, spare goggles with lenses scratched from countless winds, a crumpled map of the Atlantic route folded haphazardly as if stuffed away in haste. His gloved fingers paused as they brushed a photograph, its edges curling, tucked discreetly beneath a silk scarf of deep burgundy. He drew it out with care, a candid image of Hargreaves, his arm draped about a woman with dark, lustrous hair and a radiant smile that seemed to light the faded paper. She was a stranger to Poirot, her identity veiled, her presence in this intimate moment, a riddle yet unsolved. Her eyes, bright with affection, gazed at Hargreaves, who returned her look with a warmth rarely seen in the stern captain's demeanour. Poirot turned the photograph over, his keen eyes tracing the inscription in elegant, looping script. "You promised forever." A woman's hand had penned it, of that he was certain, but whose? He tilted his head, studying the words as though they might whisper their author's name, then slipped the photo into his pocket, his mind weaving this delicate thread into the growing fabric of the mystery. Miss Lucy Carter sat in the aerodrome's office, her hands folded tightly in her lap. her face still pale from the morning's horrors, her eyes shadowed with the weight of what she had witnessed. Poirot settled opposite her on a chair that creaked beneath his slight frame, his tone gentle as he sought to coax forth her memories without stirring the embers of her grief. "Mademoiselle Carter," he began, his voice a soft murmur against the hum of the office radiator. "You spoke of Captain Hargreaves' concerns. He mentioned changes. Risky ones, oui? Perhaps you might share what troubled him in those final days?" Carter nodded faintly, her voice a whisper as her gaze drifted to the window, where the mist clung to the wreckage like a shroud. "He was worried about the modifications to the fuel system," she said, her words halting. "He said they were untested, that they could be dangerous. Miss Weston, she insisted they'd make the flight faster, more efficient, but he wasn't so sure." Poirot's moustache twitched faintly, his fingers steepled before him. "And did he confront her, this Miss Weston, about these doubts?" "I don't know," Carter replied, her eyes distant, lost in the fog beyond the glass. "He didn't say, but he was tense, always checking the plane himself, running his hands over every bolt and wire as if he feared something might give way. He didn't trust easily. Not even—" Her voice trailed off, and she pressed her lips together, as though reluctant to finish the thought. "C'est intéressant," Poirot murmured, his mind flickering back to an earlier conversation. Miss Weston's assertion that Hargreaves had trusted her fully, her words delivered with such confidence. A curious contradiction, yet he kept his expression serene, revealing nothing. "Trust, mademoiselle. It is a fragile thing, no? One may profess it, while another doubts its very foundation." The maintenance logs lay spread across the desk, their pages a meticulous record of the Skylark's care, or so they seemed. Poirot's eyes darted over the entries, his fingers tracing dates and signatures. A faint discrepancy caught his gaze. A fuel line inspection logged for the evening before the flight, signed by Sergeant Brennan. Yet the ink was smudged, the date altered from an earlier day. Poirot leaned back, his little grey cells humming. A forgery, perhaps, he mused aloud, or a hasty correction. But why? He closed the log with a snap, his mind alight with possibilities, the wrench, the fabric, the photo, the logs, each a thread in the tapestry of treachery. And at the center, a figure whose pride and pain had woven a deadly design. Chapter 6. Where were they? The evening shadows lengthened across Biggin Hill Aerodrome, cloaking the bustling hub in a somber hush. The air, sharp with the bite of autumn and the lingering acrid tang of fuel, carried a chill that seemed to whisper of secrets yet unveiled. Hercule Poirot, his diminutive form wrapped in an overcoat of impeccable cut, stood within the Aerodrome Café, a sanctuary of warmth amid the gathering dusk. The windows bore the faint mist of steaming breath, and the clink of teacups punctuated the murmur of subdued voices. Poirot sipped his hot chocolate, its delicate aroma a balm to his fastidious senses, and surveyed the room with eyes that gleamed like polished jade. His task this night was clear: to sift through the alibis of those entwined in the tragic fate of the Skylark. The crash, a deliberate act of sabotage, had claimed Captain Victor Hargreaves, and now Poirot's little grey cells hummed with the urgency of discovery. He began with Tom Reynolds, the eager young reporter whose pencil hovered over a well-worn notepad. "Monsieur Reynolds," Poirot said, his voice a measured cadence. "You were here last night observing the preparations, oui?" Reynolds shifted in his seat, his youthful zeal tempered by the day's grim weight. "Yes, sir," he replied. "I was covering the flight. Hargreaves's big moment." "And Captain Drake?" Poirot pressed, his tone deceptively light. "You saw him in the pilot's lounge?" "For a time," Reynolds said, his brow creasing. He was there, chatting with the others, but I saw him leave. Around 9, I'd say. Heading toward the hangar. Poirot's mustache gave a faint twitch. C'est curieux. And did he return? Reynolds shook his head. Not while I was there. I left soon after to file my notes. A gap, Poirot mused, filing the detail away. He thanked Reynolds with a nod and departed the cafe, his steps precise as he crossed the tarmac to the office. A small, cluttered space where Miss Clara Weston sat, her hands folded over a ledger, her grey jumpsuit a muted echo of her guarded demeanour. "Mademoiselle Weston," Poirot greeted, his voice cutting through the stillness. "You were here last night, in this very office, non?" Weston's eyes met his, steady yet shadowed. "Yes," she said. "I was reviewing the fuel system logs, alone." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze falling upon the desk clock. 9:15 p.m., it read now. He recalled the maintenance log, stamped at 8:45 p.m. "A meticulous task," he remarked. "And no one saw you?" "No one," she affirmed, her fingers tightening briefly. "It was late. The others had gone." "Naturellement," Poirot said, his smile faint. Yet his mind noted the solitude, the unverified span of time, an opportunity perhaps for one so skilled. Next, he sought Mr. Edward Sinclair, found in a meeting room still strewn with papers from the night before. Sinclair stood, his suit pristine despite the hour, his face a mask of cool resolve. "Monsieur Sinclair," Poirot began, "you were with your sponsors last night, I understand." Sinclair nodded curtly. "From 8 until 10, discussing the flight's funding." "And yet," Poirot continued, his tone velvet smooth, "you stepped out, oui?" A flicker crossed Sinclair's features. "Briefly," he admitted. "Around 9:30, for a cigarette. I was back within 10 minutes. Poirot's fingers brushed his moustache. 10 minutes, he echoed. "A short walk, perhaps. To the hangar." Sinclair's gaze hardened. "I stayed near the building," he said. "Ask Hargrove. He'll confirm I returned." Poirot inclined his head, his mind already turning to the hangar, where Mr. George Palmer awaited with the time log spread across a workbench. The air there was heavy with grease and metal, the hum of machinery a distant pulse. "Sergeant Brennan," Poirot said, his voice sharp. "He was here last night." Palmer pointed to an entry. "Clocked out at 8:50, he said, frowning. "Early for him. He usually stays till 10. "Très intéressant," Poirot murmured, his eyes gleaming. "And no one saw him after?" "Not that I know," Palmer replied, scratching his chin. "He just left." Opportunity, Poirot thought, his mind weaving the threads tighter. Returning to the cafe, he approached the waiter, a harried man wiping a tray with a cloth. "Madame Marwood?" Poirot inquired. "She was here last night?" The waiter shrugged. "By the window, yes. But she stepped out. Said she needed air. Couldn't tell you when she came back. It was a madhouse." Poirot settled into a chair, his little grey cells alight with the day's gleanings. Weston and Brennan stood apart, her alibi unverified, his departure premature, each with the means and moment to tamper with the skylark. Yet Drake's wanderings, Sinclair's absence, and Marwood's vagueness wavered like reeds in the wind, neither firm nor frail. The truth, Poirot knew, lay in the delicate interplay of these accounts, a puzzle yet incomplete. He sipped his hot chocolate once more, the warmth of fleeting comfort, and resolved to press deeper into the shadows of Biggin Hill. Chapter 7. Hidden Truths. As the first light of dawn crept over Biggin Hill Aerodrome, casting a pale glow across the mist-shrouded fields, Hercule Poirot stepped from his lodgings, his overcoat buttoned against the morning chill. The aerodrome, once a hive of bustling ambition, now lay cloaked in an uneasy stillness, its pulse stilled by the shadow of tragedy. Poirot's mind, however, thrummed with purpose, for the secrets of this place were beginning to unfurl, each a delicate thread in the intricate tapestry of deceit that had ended Captain Victor Hargreaves's life. Poirot's first stop was the pilot's lounge, where the air hung heavy with the mingled scents of tobacco and aged leather, a faint haze of yesterday's smoke still clinging to the room. The walls, adorned with faded photographs of daring aviators, seemed to watch him with silent reproach, their frames tilted, as if in mourning. Mr. Palmer, the aerodrome manager, had provided the logbooks with a curious glance, and now they lay open before Poirot on a mahogany table, their pages a meticulous chronicle of flights. His sharp eyes darted over Captain Drake's entries, bold scrawls boasting of daring stunts, yet a comparison with the master log revealed a flight unrecorded, a phantom feat. The ink on Drake's signature was slightly smudged, a telltale sign of haste or nerves. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, tracing the forged signature with a gloved finger. A man who builds his own legend, perhaps to conceal a lesser truth. He closed the book with a snap, his little grey cells alight with the implications of Drake's envy. Next, Poirot sought Miss Weston's office, a cluttered den of blueprints and tools, the air thick with the scent of grease and metal. She was absent, summoned by a mechanic, and Poirot seized the moment to survey the room. His gaze settled on her desk, where a letter peeked from beneath scattered papers. With a deft hand he extracted it, recognizing as the same handwriting on the note inscripted behind Hargreaves's photograph. The note was brief, its tone steeped in quiet anguish. "Victor, your words were once my solace, but now they ring hollow. How could you turn away when I needed you most? Clara." Poirot's moustache twitched as he pocketed the note. A love scorned, a motive steeped in passion. Weston's heart held more than mere engineering skill. He then ventured to Mr. Sinclair's office, a fortress of ledgers and restraint, the walls lined with stern portraits of past investors. Sinclair shuffled papers as Poirot entered, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "Monsieur Sinclair," Poirot greeted smoothly. "The investigation, it does not disrupt your work?" Sinclair's tight smile belied his strain. "Not at all, though Hargreaves' loss complicates matters." Poirot's eyes caught a letter marked "Final Notice," its red ink stark against the pale stationery. "Financial matters, I see," he remarked casually. Sinclair's hand stilled. "A temporary setback," he said curtly. "Nothing I cannot remedy." "With Hargreaves' triumph, perhaps," Poirot mused. "But now—" "Now, I must find another way," Sinclair admitted, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "Or face ruin." In the workshop, Poirot found a young mechanic, grease-stained and eager, his hands deftly sorting through a box of spare parts. "You worked with Sergeant Brennan, oui?" Poirot inquired. "Aye," the lad nodded, his voice tinged with unease. "He handled parts. But sometimes things went missing, bolts, wires. Brennan blamed miscounts. But I saw him argue with Hargreaves once. Hargreaves said he'd go to the authorities unless Brennan came clean." "Most enlightening," Poirot murmured. A thief caught by his victim, a dangerous secret indeed. Hargreaves's office, a small room cluttered with maps and flight plans, yielded Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, sorting papers with a somber air. "The will?" Poirot asked. "It has been read?" "Not yet," Thompson replied, his voice heavy with the weight of his task. "But Mrs. Marwood inherits all, millions, with the insurance." "A motive most compelling," Poirot mused, his mind weaving greed into the pattern. Finally, back in the workshop, Poirot found Weston alone. her hands trembling slightly as she sorted through a tray of tools, the faint clang of metal echoing in the cavernous space. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, his voice cutting through the stillness, "you worked closely with Captain Hargreaves, did you not?" Weston's gaze met his, her expression guarded yet tinged with a shadow of unease. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a flicker of something unspoken. "He relied on my expertise for the Skylark." Poirot stepped closer, his keen eyes noting the tension in her posture. "A great responsibility," he remarked, "and one that must have forged a certain bond between you." Her fingers paused over a wrench, and for a moment her composure wavered. "He was a demanding man," she said, her tone clipped. "But he knew quality when he saw it." "Précisément," Poirot murmured, his gaze lingering on her. "Yet, in such proximity, one might form attachments beyond the professional." Weston's cheeks flushed faintly, and she turned away, busying herself with the tools. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Poirot's moustache twitched, his mind filing away her reaction. "Peut-être," he said gently. "But the heart, mademoiselle, it often speaks when we least expect it." As he departed, the suspect's secrets swirled in his mind: Drake's deceit, Weston's hidden turmoil, Sinclair's desperation, Brennan's theft, Marwood's gain. Each deepened the mystery, and Poirot knew his little grey cells would soon illuminate the path to justice. Chapter 8. A misleading clue. The workshop at Biggin Hill Aerodrome lay steeped in shadow, its vast expanse a labyrinth of machinery and metal, faintly agleam beneath the pallid glow of hanging lamps. The air bore the tang of oil and the sharp bite of steel, a scent that clung to the senses as tenaciously as suspicion now clung to the minds of those within. Hercule Poirot stood at a workbench, his small, dapper figure a stark silhouette against the hulking forms of tools and engines. In his gloved hands he held a wrench, its surface dulled by wear, a seemingly ordinary tool, yet one that held secrets beneath its weathered exterior. Beside him, Inspector Grayson loomed, his broad shoulders taut, his face etched with the stern resolve of a man accustomed to the weight of evidence. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the wrench, pausing as he noticed a small patch on the handle where the texture seemed slightly raised, the color a touch too fresh compared to the rest of the tool. It was a thin layer of paint, recently applied, and out of place amidst the workshop's gritty patina. With the precision that defined him, Poirot retrieved a small tool from his pocket, a penknife, its blade gleaming faintly, and gently scraped at the patch. The paint flaked away, revealing the initials J.B. etched into the metal beneath, stark and undeniable. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft yet carrying the weight of discovery as he turned to Grayson. "Observe. These initials were hidden, concealed beneath this paint. A deliberate act, perhaps, to shield the identity of the wrench's owner?" Grayson leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he studied the newly uncovered letters. "So someone tried to cover it up," he muttered, his tone grim. "But they didn't reckon on you spotting it." Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "The little grey cells, Inspector. They notice what haste seeks to obscure. This paint, it is too new, too careful for a workshop tool. It tells us not only of ownership, but of intent. The revelation of the initials J.B. marked a turning point, a clue that pointed both to the wrench's possessor and to a calculated effort to deceive, a thread in the tapestry of mystery that Poirot now held firmly in his grasp. "This wrench," Grayson declared, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade, "was found by the severed fuel line of the Skylark. It belongs to Sergeant Brennan. His mark is plain upon it." Poirot turned the tool over, his green eyes glinting with a feline curiosity as he traced the crude etching. "So it would appear, mon ami," he murmured, his tone soft yet resonant with an undercurrent of doubt. And yet, appearances, they are often the most deceptive of companions. The workshop door creaked open, admitting Sergeant Jack Brennan, ushered in by a constable whose face bore the gravity of the moment. Brennan's weathered features flushed with a sudden heat, his eyes narrowing as they fixed upon the wrench in Poirot's grasp. "What's this, then?" he growled, his voice rough as the rasp of a file, his stance bristling with defiance. Grayson stepped forward, his gaze unyielding. "This wrench, Brennan, yours by all accounts, was discovered at the crash site. What have you to say?" Brennan's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "Aye, it's mine, or was," he snapped. "But I didn't use it for no sabotage. It's not the tool for such work. I'd swear it on my mother's grave." Poirot's interest quickened, his moustache giving the faintest twitch as he regarded the man. "Explain yourself, Sergeant," he said, his voice calm, a velvet sheath over the steel of his inquiry. Brennan gestured sharply toward the wrench, his rough hand slicing the air. "That's for heavy bolts, big jobs, not the fiddly stuff like cutting lines or cables. You'd want something finer, a blade or cutters, not this clumsy lump." Poirot inclined his head, his fingers tracing the wrench's bulk with deliberate care. "You speak truly," he mused, his mind racing with the precision of a well-tuned engine. "This tool, it could not have wrought the delicate ruin we found in the Skylark. The fuel line, the cables, their severance was an act of finesse." Grayson's brow furrowed, his certainty wavering like a flame in a draught. "But it was there, man, your prints upon it." "Someone set me up," Brennan roared, his voice rising in a tide of desperation. "I tell you, I had no hand in this." As the sergeant's protest echoed through the workshop, Poirot's gaze drifted to the shadowed edge of the room, where Miss Clara Weston stood, her presence almost spectral amid the clutter of tools. She was unusually still, her hands clasped before her, her gaze fixed on the floor as though lost in thought. Poirot noted her silence, a stark contrast to her usual meticulous focus, but he made no comment, his attention returning to Brennan. Just then the workshop door swung open once more, and Captain Lionel Drake strode in, his face taut with agitation. He paused, his eyes flicking between Brennan and the wrench, a tense silence hanging in the air as he exchanged a brief, charged glance with the sergeant. Poirot's keen eyes caught the flicker of unease in Drake's posture, a subtle shift that spoke of hidden currents beneath the surface. "Captain Drake," Poirot said smoothly, his voice breaking the silence, "you arrive at a most opportune moment. Perhaps you have something to add to this discussion?" Drake's jaw tightened, his bravado momentarily dimmed. "I heard the commotion," he said curtly. "Thought I'd see what's what." Poirot's smile was faint, his gaze piercing. "Indeed. And what is your opinion of this wrench, Hein? A tool for sabotage or a mere distraction?" Drake's eyes narrowed, his fingers twitching at his sides. "I wouldn't know," he replied, his tone guarded. "But if Brennan says it's not the right tool, I'd trust his word. He knows his trade." Grayson pressed forward, his voice sharp with frustration. "Trust or no, the evidence is damning. Your wrench, your prints, your access to the plane—" "Enough!" Brennan interrupted, his voice a thunderclap in the confined space. "I've told you, it's a setup. Someone's trying to pin this on me." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture a quiet command for calm. "Let us not leap to conclusions, Inspector," he said, his tone measured. "The sergeant's point is valid. This wrench is ill-suited to the task, and yet its presence at the scene cannot be ignored. We must ask ourselves, why was it placed there? To mislead, perhaps, to cast suspicion upon an innocent man. Grayson's shoulders sagged slightly, the burden of uncertainty pressing upon him. "Then we are no further along?" "Non, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice a quiet assurance as his eyes swept the room, taking in the subtle shifts of those present. Each false path illuminates the true one. The saboteur's hand grows clearer with every misstep. As Poirot spoke, Weston's gaze flicked up briefly, her expression unreadable, before she turned away, her fingers absently tracing the edge of a workbench. Poirot filed away the observation, his mind alight with possibilities, yet he gave no outward sign of his thoughts. The workshop fell into a heavy silence, the weight of unanswered questions hanging in the air like the scent of oil. Poirot set the wrench upon the bench with a soft, decisive clink, its sound a punctuation to the moment. "We must proceed with care," he murmured almost to himself. "The truth lies not in the obvious, but in the shadows between." Chapter 9. The Unmasking. The hangar at Biggin Hill Aerodrome stood vast and hollow, its steel girders stretching into the gloom like the bones of some great leviathan. The air thrummed with the faint drone of distant engines, each sound reverberating off the walls in a chorus of unease that pressed upon the senses. Shadows lurked in the corners, and the sharp tang of oil mingled with the chill of the October evening, wrapping the scene in an oppressive shroud. Hercule Poirot, small yet commanding, stood at the heart of this cavernous space, his polished shoes gleaming faintly, his moustache a testament to his unassailable order. Before him, arranged in a taut semicircle, were the suspects: Captain Lionel Drake, Mr. Edward Sinclair, Sergeant Jack Brennan, Mrs. Evelyn Marwood, and Miss Clara Weston. Their faces, etched with strain, flickered with dread as they awaited the verdict of the little Belgian detective. Poirot's green eyes swept over them, piercing as a blade. "Mes amis," he began, his voice a rhythmic cadence that sliced through the silence, "we gather here in this temple of ambition to lay bare the truth of Captain Victor Hargreaves's demise. A man of valor, struck down not by chance, but by a hand most cunning." He paused, letting the echoes of his words ripple through the hangar. "The sabotage of the Skylark was an act of precision," he continued, his tone sharpening. "The fuel line, severed with care, the control cables, frayed to fail at the fatal moment. Such work demands skill, a mastery of the machine's very soul." Captain Drake shifted, his bold facade cracking. "Out with it, man," he snapped, his voice rough. "Who's the devil behind this?" Poirot's smile was a fleeting shadow. "Patience, Monsieur Drake. The truth. It reveals itself in its own time." He turned to Drake, his gaze steady. "You, with your envy of Hargreaves's glory, your logbook, a fiction of false triumphs, did you not wish him undone?" Drake's face darkened, his fists tightening. "I'd have outflown him fair and square," he retorted, "not skulked about with tools." "C'est vrai," Poirot conceded, "for you lack the finesse, the technical art, to weave such a subtle doom." Next, he faced Mr. Sinclair, whose composure hung by a thread. "Monsieur Sinclair, your fortunes rested upon Hargreaves' wings. His death, it is your ruin, non?" Sinclair's lips tightened, his voice clipped. "I needed him alive, Monsieur Poirot. His flight was my salvation." "Exactement," Poirot murmured. "Your desperation, it points elsewhere." Sergeant Brennan stood rigid as Poirot's gaze fell upon him. "Sergeant, the wrench at the scene, it bore your mark. A damning clue, oui?" Brennan's eyes blazed. "Planted," he barked. "It's no tool for that job. I've said it plain." "Oui," Poirot agreed, his tone bright. "A misdirection cleverly laid. Your motive, it is too frail to bear this crime." Mrs. Marwood met Poirot's eyes with cool elegance. "Madame, your gain is great. Yet access to the plane eluded you, did it not?" Her smile was serene. "I am no engineer, monsieur. My hands are clean of such deeds." "Naturellement," Poirot said, his voice softening as he turned to Miss Clara Weston, who stood apart, her hands clasped, her eyes downcast. "Mademoiselle Weston, you, with your engineer's soul, knew the Skylark as none other did." Weston's head jerked up, her voice trembling. I did nothing wrong." "Ah, mais non," Poirot countered, stepping closer. "The fabric in the cables, it matches your garb. Your alibi, it falters. And the letter mademoiselle found in your desk, it speaks of love betrayed. Furthermore, the wrench found at the scene, bearing Sergeant Brennan's mark, was planted by you to frame him. You sought to divert suspicion from yourself by making it appear that he was the saboteur. However, your attempt was in vain, for the wrench was not the tool used in the sabotage, as Sergeant Brennan rightly pointed out, and thus it only served to confirm your guilt." A murmur stirred among them, and Weston's face crumpled. "He promised we'd be engaged," she whispered, tears brimming. Then he turned to another one, as he always did. "I was a fool." Poirot's tone grew firm, relentless. "Miss Weston, revenge and fear drove you. You, with your skill, your access, you severed his wings to bind him to your pain." She shook her head, a sob escaping. "I only meant to stop him, to delay the flight. I never thought—" "Enough!" Poirot's voice rang out, silencing her. "It all accuses you." Weston sank to her knees, her confession spilling forth. "He said we'd be together, then moved on. I couldn't bear it, his betrayal, his leaving me behind." The hanger stilled, her words a heavy shroud. Inspector Grayson stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Miss Weston, you're under arrest." As she was led away, Poirot turned, his expression solemn. The truth, illuminated by his little grey cells, had prevailed, leaving the hangar's echoes to mourn the cost of jealousy's cruel hand. Chapter 10. Farewell to the Aerodrome. The morning sun cast a pale golden light over Biggin Hill Aerodrome, its rays filtering through the open hangar doors and stretching long shadows across the concrete floor. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of oil and the distant hum of engines warming for the day's flights. Hercule Poirot stood near the entrance, his small, dapper figure a stark contrast to the vastness of the space, his polished shoes gleaming faintly in the light. His moustache, waxed to perfection, twitched slightly as he surveyed the scene before him. The events of the previous evening weighed heavily on his mind. Miss Clara Weston had been arrested, her confession still echoing in his thoughts. Poirot's gaze drifted to the spot where she had stood, her once confident posture now a memory of defeat. The grey jumpsuit she wore, a symbol of her engineering prowess, had seemed to weigh her down, a reminder of the betrayal she had wrought. Her hands, which had once deftly manipulated tools and blueprints, had trembled faintly as Inspector Grayson secured the handcuffs about her wrists. Poirot's keen eyes had noted the slump of her shoulders, the way she had shrunk into herself as Grayson spoke in low, formal tones. "A pity, Inspector," Poirot had said softly, his voice a gentle cadence tinged with regret. A mind so brilliant, yet twisted by the heart's dark labyrinth. Grayson had turned to him, wiping his brow with a handkerchief, his face etched with the strain of duty fulfilled. "A tragic affair, Monsieur Poirot," he had replied, his tone heavy. "I'd never have pegged her for it, not without your insight." Poirot's moustache had given a faint twitch, a flicker of quiet pride. "Mais oui, mon ami. The little grey cells, they see what the eyes alone cannot." He had adjusted his hat with a precise gesture, ensuring its symmetry, and stepped from the hangar into the crisp October air. Now, as he stood in the morning light, Poirot reflected on the case. The aerodrome stirred with the day's nascent life. Mechanics clattered tools against engines, their shouts mingling with the hum of propellers warming for flight. Poirot walked slowly, his steps measured, the gravel crunching beneath his feet like the ticking of a clock winding down. The runway stretched before him, a ribbon of possibility now stained with memory, and Poirot's gaze drifted to a plane taxiing slowly, its silver form glinting in the sun. Ambition, he mused aloud, his voice a soft murmur against the growing roar of the engines. It is a fire that warms the soul, or consumes it utterly. Hargreaves sought the sky's glory, but Weston's ambition for his love, it brought them both to ruin. The plane's engines surged, a thunderous crescendo that drowned the world in sound. It sped down the runway, lifting gracefully into the sky, its ascent a bittersweet echo of dreams realized and shattered. Poirot watched it climb, his heart heavy with the weight of what might have been, a record unbroken, a life unended. As the sleek black car drew up beside him and the driver stepped out with a deferential nod to open the door, Inspector Grayson approached, having come to bid farewell to Poirot. Pausing before stepping into the car, Poirot turned to face the inspector and said, "It has been a pleasure, Inspector. Au revoir." Grayson clasped his hand firmly, a glint of admiration in his eyes. "The pleasure's mine, Monsieur Poirot. Safe travels." Poirot settled into the car's plush seat, the door closing with a soft thud. As the vehicle pulled away, he cast a final glance at the aerodrome, the hangars receding, the planes poised like birds awaiting flight, the figures of those left behind dwindling into the distance. The mystery was solved, justice served, yet the echoes of human frailty lingered in his mind, a quiet refrain of sorrow. He straightened his tie with a fastidious touch, his lips curving into a wistful smile. Another truth uncovered, another balance restored. But the price of ambition, of love, turned to vengeance, would remain with him, a poignant reminder of the fragile thread that binds dreams to destruction. As the veil of mystery parts, Hercule Poirot stands triumphant, his little grey cells piercing through a shroud of deception. The truth is laid bare. Miss Clara Weston, the brilliant engineer, sabotaged the Skylark, her heart twisted by unrequited love and the sting of Hargreaves' betrayal. Her desperate act spiraled into tragedy, severing the life of the man she once adored. Poirot's relentless pursuit of justice has prevailed, yet the aerodrome lingers under a pall of sorrow, a testament to ambition's perilous edge and love's destructive shadow. We hope this story has honored the legacy of Agatha Christie, whose brilliance in weaving mystery and human nature remains unparalleled. Did Weston's motive catch you by surprise, or did you glimpse her guilt in the wreckage? Share your thoughts below. If the aviation affair has enthralled you, please like this episode and subscribe to Nocturnal Tales for more mysteries. Support our storytelling journey via the Super Thanks button under this video or via our Buy Me a Coffee page, link in the description. Thank you for joining us, and until our next nocturnal adventure, may your nights brim with curiosity and your days with clarity.